let's come back. Okay? A few more cases to cover and finish this one. The 8385. And take a look at page 565 at the very top. So once they've said that non-signatory governs, they also say whether or not one lifts the corporate veil depends on many factors in each case. Certain elements are almost always necessary. They include a significant amount of control of the subsidiary actions by the parent company or the shareholder, and the insolvency of the subsidiary. So if the subsidiary is insolvent, you know that they probably intended that to happen, and you want to hold the parent company responsible. Once they've said that, towards the very end of that paragraph, they say the question that one must ultimately answer is when the legal fiction of corporate legal personality must bow to the reality of human behavior and cease protecting those who hide behind the corporate veil as a way of promoting their own interests at the expense of those who have traded with the company. That is the key passage. So that is the basic principle of lifting the corporate veil. Are they hiding behind this corporate veil and benefiting out of it, and to the detriment of people who are doing business? So with that, they come to the conclusion that, and they even cited it out chemical cases, and they bring in this. Okay. Peterson Farms is a UK High Court case. And what happened in this case is, just to facilitate the discussion, Peterson Farms is a Kansas company, right? It's Arkansas. It's from Arkansas. They contract with an Indian company, right? And whatever biological materials they supplied turned out to be harmful, not only to the party that directly contracted with them, but down the chain. So this is Peterson Farm. This is the Indian company, right? They sustained injury, and there were other companies here. The Indian company, X, Y, I don't know the names, and Z. So when injury was close to this one, these also sustained injury as a result of the respondent Peterson Farms breach of contract, basically, right? So this is a farm product biology agents were supplied. It turned out not to be very good, caused injury. They wanted to rely on a group of companies doctrine that if this is responsible to this one, they also wanted to be a party to the main contract using the Dow Chemical principle. The UK court obviously did not like that idea, right? What did they say? They said, no, this is not going to work. The relationship is directly between these two guys and subsidiaries. These guys are not even part of the same company, but even if they were, they say the group of companies doctrine is not a part of English law. You have to establish your relationship with each and every one of the respondents, one by one. You cannot just say, because I have a relationship with this one, there should also be a party. This notion, they say, is not working anymore. But I think more important, what they're thinking about is, if you compensate these guys, and the idea was, if you compensate these guys must compensate these guys because they had independent contractual relationship with each one of these, right? You cannot just compensate this and ask the same guy to compensate each one of them separately. So it's down the chain. So this liability has to end somewhere, and then this guy's responsibility has to commence, and then this guy, this one, this guy. So that's how hierarchically you just deal with it. You can't just, if part of it is actually, if you hold this guy responsible for this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, where is it going to end? It's going to be consequential damages, foreseeable damages, things like that, and get into those kind of, they didn't want to get into that through the actual process. And they try to apply Kansas law directly. But now, look at the very last sentence on page 568. They say, the identification of the parties to the agreement is a question of substantive, not procedural law. You understand why they say that? The identification of the parties is not a question of procedure, but it's a question of substantive law. Why?
The arbitration agreement should be viewed as a contract.
Exactly. The arbitration contract, the arbitration agreement is a contract, right? So whether or not it covers parties, whether or not it's valid, whether or not this, whether or not that, needs to be determined on the basis of contract law. Basically. That's the court's narrow view. It is a question of contract interpretation. If it is a question of contract interpretation, you need substantive contract law to interpret it. Right? But now, if you look at these, there is something extra contractual, right? Agency, it could be contracts. Assignment, assumption, ratification, investment, safety, carry forward. All of these could be contract concepts. Some of them are not. Alter ego, stuff. Those are equity doctrines. Even then, you need substantive law, right, to determine even alter ego, even estoppel. You need to look at some substantive rules to make those determinations. That's probably what the court is getting at. So they actually granted, is entitled to have the party award payment for losses and set aside. That's the last sentence of that case. They actually, Peterson is entitled to have that part of the award, which awarded payment of losses by others, saying in group entities set aside for want of jurisdiction. So they allowed this one, but they did not allow any one of these. They said there was no jurisdiction. That means they were not a part of the arbitration agreement. The Dalla case comes back again. You remember this case, the Pakistan v. Dalla? And now if you remember the previous one before the UK Court of Appeals, and this one, what is the distinction? This is in France, Paris. Did they come to the same conclusion as the UK court? They come to Exactly. They come to a different conclusion. In fact, opposite conclusion. On the basis of the same set of evidence, they wanted to. The question was whether or not the Pakistani government was a party, the ministry was a party to the agreement. They looked at the same set of factors, like the letter that was written, the letterhead that was missing from the trust being seizing, things like that. And then the French court said, yes, the Pakistani government was a part of this agreement. Right? If you look at the very last paragraph, the second from last, this involvement of the MORA without there being record of acts performed by the trust as well as the MORA's behavior at the time of the pre-contractual negotiations confirmed that the creation of the trust was purely formal, in that the MORA, as argued by that, behaved as the true Pakistani party to the financial operation. You see? As a consequence, the government of Pakistan's claim that the tribunal incorrectly extended the arbitration clause to the MORA and held that it had jurisdiction is unfounded. Hence, the applications for setting aside the award on jurisdiction of 26 June 2001 rendered in Paris, and consequently the two following awards of 19 January and 28 June are dismissed. It's very interesting, and that's the exact opposite of the UK court statement. Same evidence was presented to them, but they concluded that the Pakistani government indeed was using the trust to shield itself from liability, and therefore it's an alter ego. So it's not enough that you argue very well before court. It's not enough that you have enough evidence. You need to be in the right court to win. Which one makes more sense to you, the UK approach or the French approach? Were you convinced when we read the UK court case that the Pakistani government was not a party? Which one makes more sense? Which one do you like better?
Personally, I like the French
You think this is the more...
Yeah. But just for some personal prejudice, because I think the states is very tricky and they always hide behind the companies.
They set up trust and then they have to hide behind that. Do you think that's what happened in this case? They set it up, they didn't capitalize it, they kind of tried to shield themselves from liability, it didn't go very well. And then they say, oh, we have nothing to do with it.
Yes, because according to the former cases, it shows that the Pakistan government just make an audience and everything just is flawed. So I hate this behavior. So personally, I think this one makes sense.
This one makes sense. How about others? What do you think? Does anyone here think the UK approach was better? That it makes more sense in terms of the evidence that we looked at? The one thing that we know is French courts are more pro-arbitration than UK courts, traditionally, even today. So if you want a very close scrutiny of our trial process, select London as the seat of the arbitration. If you want a very lax review of the trial process, go to Paris. I don't know how the Chinese courts are these days in terms of being more pro-arbitration for certain cases than others, but this is a good example of, to compare the UK and not always, I mean, but there might be variations, but generally is indicative of how they're inclined. Okay, last two cases. Allocation of competence. The question is, so you fast forward pages 588. So when I assign you the notes and question section, it's useful to read them, but they're not mandatory. You can gloss over them more, but they will help you, but obviously the cases are always mandatory. What we mean by allocation of competence is when a question of whether or not C is bound by the arbitration agreement becomes an issue. The question of competence is who does have the competence to decide whether or not C should be a party to the agreement. It's just like whether or not the arbitration agreement itself is valid. The courts have handled this question slightly differently, right? In these cases, the Oriental case and Builder's case, we can discuss both of them together. But the Oriental case, there was an alter ego analysis or claim. They should be a party because of one of these theories. Oh, this is third party is an alter ego. They did that deliberately. That claim was presented to the court. The question is, does the court adjudicate that finally, or does it refer the same issue to the arbitral tribunal? That is the question. The way it arises, the way the competence question arises is A wants to go to court. B wants to go to tribunal. C does not want to go to tribunal. C actually wants to go to court. This is court. So when B initiates an arbitral process, that is a question that is different. When A initiates an arbitral, a court case, A sues B in court. B says because there is an arbitration agreement, the court must refer these parties to arbitration. And that is what B wants to do. C comes in and says, no, I'd rather stay in court. Right? I'm not bound by the arbitration agreement, so I don't want to go to arbitration. It's at this moment that the court is asked to rule on not only the validity of the arbitration agreement between A and B, but also whether or not C is actually bound. So the question of competence is, does the court determine the question of whether or not C is bound, decide it completely on its merits, or does it refer that particular question to the arbitral tribunal? Because if it does, it is basically sending a potentially not bound party to arbitration and having the tribunal decide their own jurisdiction over C. That is a separate question from their competence vis-a-vis B and A. Question is more or less similar, but it's slightly different. In each one of these cases, in both cases, the courts have decided that the question of whether or not C is bound through the application of the alter ego doctrine must be decided by the court. Initially, it's a threshold inquiry. However, they also suggested, at least in the first case, that we can actually defer that question to down the road. Defer it, let the arbitration take place, and when it comes back, we will decide whether it is an alter ego or not. Because the determination of alter ego or not is an extremely fact-intensive inquiry. Right? You're basically trying to determine what are they trying to do, right? And that requires a lot of discovery of evidence. Full-fledged litigation about this particular issue. What were you thinking when you set it out? How much money? How many directors? What documents do you have? What were you thinking? What was the intent? It's like full-fledged trial. So the question is, do they determine that first before referring the matter to arbitration? And they seem to think that that needs to happen and the court needs to do it, not the tribunal. However, to facilitate this thing, it may not be necessary to do that if you, for instance, win. There's no need to do it. The only time that you need to determine that is if you lose and the other guy does not have money, and they need to come back to the third party for satisfaction. So for that reason, we can defer this until it becomes so critical that we need to decide this. So let the arbitral proceeding continue. Let us see how it goes. But if it becomes necessary for us to decide whether there is an alter ego relationship or not, then at that point we can hold a full-fledged trial and get to the bottom of it. At least in the first case, that's what they say, right? I think if you look at the very last sentence, otherwise, so they give them an option to the parties. Otherwise, they say the motion for appointment of an arbitrator is stayed pending this court's determination of the identity of the parties. So that is very clear that they thought that they needed to determine the identity of the parties. Adamant in that. You know, the principle of competence says that the parties, no, the tribunal needs to decide whether the arbitration agreement is valid or not. We've studied this, right? A lot of most courts use the prima facie doctrine. You look at it, if it looks okay, you refer it and have them determine. In the United States, there is a clear and unmistakable evidence standard. That's a higher standard. What they're saying here is even higher than that. They're not even allowing the tribunal to make that decision. When it comes to the identity of the parties, the court needs to make that decision. As to when is what they gave them an option. We could do it now if you want. That is going to take 6 months and a lot of money. Or wait until it really is critical, that you really need this determination, then you come back to us. Right? Because it may not become necessary. The reason why they want to bring in a third party is because if the second party is not able to satisfy the award, it's possible that you could lose the case. It's possible that you could satisfy the award by proceeding against B. C may be irrelevant. But if C becomes really relevant, let's worry about that subsequently. That is really what they were saying even though an option. And the last case is also more or less the same. It's about exercising dominance and control. And I think they come to a similar conclusion that the court needs to make that determination first and plaintiff's discovery demands in aid of Delta theory of hard written, they say, and I grant stay of proceedings under the petition and complaint, including discovery. The stay of proceedings in this case was actually granted, including the discovery for the determination of whether or not there was an alter ego. So in both cases, the examples that we have, when it comes to the question of competence, the courts appear to be inclined to decide to make that decision on their own, rather than outsourcing that particular question to the arbitral tribunal. So that's why you see a lot of court cases involving the determination of a third-party issue. But not always the case, because if you look at these other cases that we've looked at, the Dow Chemical case, for instance, and ICC 8385, in each one of these cases, you see arbitral tribunals making that decision. So it just depends on what jurisdiction you're in. And my sense is that in this case, whatever courts may not have been involved in it. How is that possible? Let's go back to this example. See, there's A, B, and C. If instead of this happens first. A, who wants to go to court, initiates the legal action, right? And C, who also wants to be in court, joins it and says, I want to be here. B says, oh no, there is an arbitration agreement between me and A, and guess what? C also should come with us to arbitration. So that's when we decide that the court needs to determine whether C is a part of it or not. That's what they're talking about in these two cases. The other possibility is B initiating an arbitral proceeding first before these guys do this. If B initiates and A and C do not dispute or do not go to court, but decide to litigate the issue before the arbitral tribunal rather than go to court, that's what you see in the Dow Chemical cases. Instead of going to court, they choose to make their argument to the arbitral tribunal. When the arbitral tribunal is asked to determine the validity of the arbitration agreement and its scope, including the identity of the parties, they cannot refuse. They may and they must determine who is legitimately before them. That is the interpretation of the arbitration contract itself. And it might require the application of all these principles to see if a third party might be brought in the arbitration proceeding. In which case they actually decided it on jurisdiction, that is the principle of competence. Competence, whether vis-a-vis B or C. Those inquiries are more or less the same, but courts seem to think that bringing in a third party is a more difficult task than determining the validity between two people who have presumably concluded an arbitration agreement. Because as we talked about, an arbitration agreement is presumptively valid as between two parties who claim that, who are theoretically or presumptively parties to that contract. The same kind of presumption may not necessarily apply to someone who says, I'm not a part of this. At least on its face, it needs to look like there is a contract binding two parties to give it presumption. If it's a third party who's not a part of that, and in fact, decidedly, admittedly, a third party, the same kind of presumption does not exist. Because even the party that's moving against them is admitting that he is a third party. Oh, I want to bring him as a third party. It's an admission that he's not a direct party. So in that case, you lack that presumption of validity of the arbitration agreement. That's probably why the courts usually want to do the inquiry themselves before outsourcing it to the arbitral tribunal. But if, as a matter of sequence, that issue is presented to the arbitral tribunal first, and the third party did not object, or did not go to court, then the arbitral tribunal may decide as they did in the Dow Chemical case. In these kinds of cases, the arbitration or court litigation is not one or two. You have multiple proceedings going on at the same time in multiple jurisdictions. So it might be misleading to think that this is the first time that this question was addressed. It might have been addressed elsewhere by different courts that we haven't seen. But ordinarily, the question of whether or not a third party must be brought into the arbitration agreement, the courts must first determine. And as we've seen in these cases, they might at times prefer to defer that question, not because of jurisdiction question, just because of sequencing, convenience, the economy of things. Okay, so in the remaining 5 minutes, let's just try to review what we've done today. It's a lot of materials that we've covered. Third party, non-signatories. Those are the same things. Non-signatories, people who have decidedly have signed a contract. How might they be brought in? Usually because they have some relationship with the dispute. And in many cases, it's because they're the parent company, they're denying responsibilities, they want to, and the other party obviously wants some, fallback in case the party that is in agreement cannot satisfy you. In many cases, that's what happens. Sometimes it's just because of the complication of the corporate structure that it's easier to just deal with all those kinds of problems together, as in Dow Chemical. But the theory is more or less that courts have used, tribunals have used, are listed here. Any one of these could help bring third parties into the dispute or the arbitral proceeding. And of course, that is not the end of the inquiry, right? This is the front end problem. Even after awards have been made, as we've seen in the Veritas case, the same question could be relitigated when an action, a legal action, is presented for enforcement. The guy who doesn't want to satisfy is going to say, "Oh, I wasn't even a party to the arbitration agreement. Why are you calling me to do this?" And then that issue is litigated again. Sometimes front end, sometimes the back end. The same issue. And in many cases, the litigation takes place before courts of law instead of before arbitral tribunals. So, and we've seen here in the French case, contrary result as the UK case in the Dalla case, and competence is the issue that we just looked at. So, more or less, this is what we intended to cover today in terms of third party. By far the most common one is obviously the alter ego inquiry. And there's a list of factors that we looked at in the Veritas case, including footnote 5, where you have those factors that you could use in making those determinations. A lot of times, if it's a question of law, they need to identify the law. And in some cases, we've seen that they talk about lex mortuoria, transnational contract law, international public policy. All of those things come together, and there is extensive use of arbitral case law here and there. So that's the world of arbitration generally. So that's it for us for today. We will continue our discussion on 5. Just continue. Maybe, I'll see you on Friday.
是弄足球企业，所以他总共40多页，需要弄33种。
除了这点，他再过2个周上要好啊，聊了个。
Question.